I always thought my marriage was solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs like every couple, but nothing that ever made me question us until that one evening. My wife, Leona, and I had been married for 9 years. 9 years of laughter, shared struggles, and memories that felt unshakable. Or so I believed. It was a typical Friday night. I had just finished washing the dishes after dinner while Leona lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone. We had settled into one of those quiet routines that married couples often do. Comfortable silence, punctuated by the occasional conversation about work, bills, or what show to binge next. Leona was acting normal. Nothing seemed off about her demeanor. She laughed softly at something on her phone, probably a meme or one of those silly videos she loved. I remember even smiling at her, thinking about how lucky I was to have someone who could light up a room with her laugh. But then her phone buzzed. I wouldn't have noticed if not for the way her face changed when she looked at it. Her usual calm expression vanished, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Surprise, maybe? Or guilt. Whatever it was, it made me pause. "Who's that?" I asked casually, wiping my hands on a dish towel. She glanced up at me, her lips curling into a nervous smile. "Just Adrian," she said quickly. Adrian. The name rang a bell. He was an old friend of hers, someone she used to work with years ago. I didn't think much of it at first. Leona had always been social, and she kept in touch with a lot of her old colleagues. Adrian was no different, or so I thought. "What's he texting about?" I pressed, more out of curiosity than suspicion. Leona shrugged, her fingers moving quickly to lock her phone. "Oh, nothing important," she said, her voice light but slightly too forced. "Just some dumb meme." Something about her tone didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. After all, she'd never given me a reason to doubt her. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully. We watched a movie together, and she seemed her usual self. But that moment with the text lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at me in a way I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I woke up before Leona and found her phone on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have even thought about looking at it. I wasn't the kind of guy to snoop. Trust had always been a cornerstone of our relationship. But this time was different. The image of her locking her phone so quickly after Adrian's message played on a loop in my head. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but my hands moved on their own. Before I knew it, I had her phone unlocked and was scrolling through her messages. There it was, Adrian's name at the top of her chat list. My heart pounded as I opened their conversation. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A few jokes, memes, and light-hearted banter. But as I scrolled further back, my stomach began to knot. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you," Adrian had written a week ago. And her reply? "Me too. I wish we could have had more time." I felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under me. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. This couldn't be real. There had to be some kind of explanation, some kind of context I was missing. But the deeper I scrolled, the worse it got. Adrian wasn't just a friend. The messages between them were flirtatious, intimate, and unmistakably romantic. There were plans for secret meetups, references to nights I knew nothing about, and even photos of them together in places she had told me she'd been alone. I slammed the phone down on the counter, my hands shaking. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Why didn't I see the signs? Was I just some blind fool this whole time? Leona's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "What are you doing?" I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her face pale as she looked at her phone in my hand. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened and she hesitated, just long enough to confirm everything I already knew. "Let me explain," she said, stepping forward. But I wasn't interested in explanations. Not yet. "How long, Leona?" I demanded, my voice growing louder. Her lips trembled. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. I snapped, slamming the phone onto the counter again. Leona stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. For the first time in 9 years, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. Leona didn't answer right away. She just stood there in the kitchen doorway, staring at me with that same wide-eyed, guilty look that only fueled the fire in my chest. My hands clenched into fists as I waited for her to say something, anything. But the silence stretched on like a rubber band about to snap. "I'm waiting," I said, my voice colder than I thought it could ever sound. Her lips parted, trembling as if she were trying to form words, but couldn't quite figure out which ones to use. Finally, she managed to stammer out, "It's not what you think, Malric." Malric. My name on her lips used to sound like home. Now it felt hollow, like a desperate plea meant to calm me down. But I wasn't calm. Not even close. "Not what I think," I repeated, laughing bitterly. I grabbed her phone off the counter and waved it in the air. "Because what I think is that my wife has been sneaking around behind my back with some guy who thinks last night was incredible. Am I missing something?" Leona's face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. But instead of making me feel bad, they only pissed me off more. She wasn't the victim here. I was. "Please, just let me explain," she begged, stepping closer. "Explain what?" I shot back. "Explain how you've been lying to me. How long has this been going on, Leona? Weeks? Months? Or are you about to tell me this is the first time and it didn't mean anything?" That last line hit a nerve. Her head snapped up and she finally met my eyes. "It's not like that," she said quickly. "Adrian and I—" She stopped, hesitated, then sighed. "It wasn't supposed to happen. It got out of hand." I stared at her, my stomach twisting into tighter knots with every word. "How long?" I repeated, my voice deadly quiet now. She hesitated again, and that pause was all the answer I needed. "For months," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 months. 4 months of lies. 4 months of her sneaking around, laughing at my jokes while texting him under the table, kissing me goodbye while planning her next meetup with him. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to piece together every moment in the past 4 months when something might have seemed off but didn't register at the time. Suddenly, a dozen little things started clicking into place. "Is that why you started working late all of a sudden?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "Because you weren't actually at work, were you?" Leona didn't answer, but the way she looked away told me everything I needed to know. "Unbelievable," I muttered, pacing the kitchen. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, bouncing between disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But at the same time, I didn't want to completely lose it. Not yet. "Malric, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for this to happen. I love you." "Stop," I snapped, cutting her off. I couldn't bear to hear those words from her right now. "Don't you dare tell me you love me. People who love their spouses don't cheat on them, Leona. They don't lie to them for months and sneak around behind their backs." She started crying harder, but I didn't care. I was too busy trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. How do you even begin to process something like this? "Did you sleep with him?" I asked suddenly, my voice sharper than I intended. Leona froze, her tears stopping for a moment as she stared at me with wide eyes. "Answer me," I shouted, slamming my fist on the counter. "Yes," she whispered, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. The world tilted. My legs felt like they might give out, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. Somehow, hearing her confirm it made everything so much worse. It wasn't just some emotional affair or harmless flirting. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. "How many times?" I asked, my voice hollow now. She didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "How many times?" I repeated, each word dripping with venom. "Twice," she said, her voice barely audible. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Twice. Right. So let me guess, once wasn't enough, but after the second time, you suddenly realized you'd made a mistake? Is that it?" "Malric, please," she sobbed, reaching for me. I stepped back, holding up my hands like her touch might burn me. "Don't. Just don't." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint sound of a car passing by outside. But all I could focus on was the weight of what she had just told me. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said quietly, my voice breaking. Leona flinched like I had slapped her. "I'm still me," she said desperately. "I'm still the woman who loves you, who wants to fix this." "You don't get to fix this," I interrupted, my voice shaking with anger. "You don't get to break my heart and then act like everything's fine as long as you say sorry. That's not how this works, Leona." She broke down completely, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table and burying her face in her hands. I wanted to feel something, anger, pity, anything, but I was too numb. For the first time in 9 years, I couldn't look at her without feeling like she was a stranger. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my coat. "Malric, wait," she started, but I was already out the door. As I walked down the street, the cold night air biting at my skin, I tried to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. My marriage, my life, had been a lie for 4 months, and the woman I thought I knew better than anyone had turned out to be someone I didn't recognize at all. I didn't know what I was going to do, but one thing was clear. Things would never be the same again. The cold night air felt like knives against my skin as I walked aimlessly down the street, my mind racing and my chest heavy. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about Leona, had crumbled in an instant. Her confession echoed in my ears, for months 2 times in the name I now hated, Adrian. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet seemed to have a destination in mind. As I walked, memories of the past few months flooded back. The late nights at work, the sudden excuses about needing space, and the way she'd started guarding her phone like it held state secrets. I should have seen it. I should have known. Before I realized it, I was standing in front of a coffee shop. Not just any coffee shop, his coffee shop. Leona had mentioned it in one of the texts. She and Adrian had met here. My jaw clenched as I stared at the darkened storefront, the closed sign mocking me. That wasn't enough for me. I needed answers. I needed to look this guy in the eye and see what kind of man would help destroy a marriage. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through the texts I'd read earlier until I found what I was looking for. A string of messages where Adrian had casually mentioned the gym he went to. It wasn't far from here, and if I was lucky, he'd still be there. I turned on my heel and started walking, my steps quick and purposeful. With every block I passed, my anger grew. I replayed Leona's confession in my head, her tearful apologies, her desperate attempts to explain. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want to hear excuses. Not from her, not from him. The gym was easy to find. Its bright neon sign cast a harsh glow on the street, and through the windows, I could see people working out, their faces focused and determined. I scanned the room, looking for him, and then I saw him. Adrian was exactly what I expected, tall, fit, and annoyingly good-looking in a way that felt almost smug. He was at the bench press, laughing with a couple of guys who looked like his friends. He had no idea I was there. No idea I knew who he was. The sight of him made my blood boil. This was the guy who had helped wreck my marriage. This was the guy Leona had chosen over me, even if just for a few moments. I didn't stop to think. I just walked inside. The gym smelled like sweat and rubber, and the clanging of weights filled the air. As I made my way toward Adrian, a part of me wondered if this was a bad idea. But I didn't care. All I knew was that I needed to do this. "Adrian," I said, my voice sharp as a blade. He looked up, confused at first, but then his face changed. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and for a split second, I saw guilt flash across his features. Good. He knew who I was. Yeah, he said, his voice cautious. I didn't wait for him to say more. You know who I am, I said, stepping closer. You've been texting my wife, meeting up with her, sleeping with her. His friends stopped what they were doing, their eyes darting between us as the weight of my words sank in. Adrian set down the barbell and stood up slowly, his expression guarded. Listen, man, he started, holding up his hands like I was a ticking bomb. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Oh, really? I snapped, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You didn't mean to screw another man's wife? You didn't mean to sneak around behind my back? He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. You knew she was married, I said, my voice rising. You knew, and you did it anyway. So spare me the bullshit excuses. Adrian glanced around nervously. People were starting to stare, their workouts forgotten as they watched the scene unfolding. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice quiet. I don't have an excuse. It was wrong, and I shouldn't have. You think sorry fixes this? I interrupted, my fists clenching at my sides. You think you can just apologize and walk away like none of this ever happened? I'm not trying to walk away, he said, his tone defensive now. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. You didn't just hurt me, I shot back. You destroyed my marriage. You tore apart the life I built with my wife. Do you even care about that? Or were you just thinking with your... Hey, one of his friends said, stepping forward like he was about to intervene. Stay out of this, I snapped, glaring at him. The friend hesitated, then backed off, muttering something under his breath. Adrian held up his hands again, trying to de-escalate. Look, Malric, he said, his voice low. I know you're angry. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it, I said, my voice shaking with rage. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what else to say. I never meant to get involved with her, okay? It happened. It happened, I repeated, my voice incredulous. You don't accidentally have an affair. You made a choice, Adrian. Both of you did. He didn't respond, and for a moment, the silence between us was deafening. I wanted to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But I didn't. As much as I hated him in that moment, I knew hitting him wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I leaned in closer, my voice low but full of venom. You might think you're sorry now, but trust me, you have no idea what you've done. You've wrecked my life, Adrian. And if you think I'm just going to roll over and let you walk away from this, you're dead wrong. With that, I turned and walked out of the gym, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. As I stepped back into the cold night air, I felt a strange mix of emotions, rage, sadness, betrayal, and a deep, aching emptiness. Confronting Adrian hadn't given me the closure I thought it would. If anything, it only made everything feel more real. I wasn't just angry at him. I was angry at Leona, angry at myself for not seeing the signs sooner, angry at the world for letting this happen. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time I reached home, the anger that had fueled me earlier had dulled into a heavy, suffocating weight in my chest. The walk hadn't helped clear my head. It only made me feel more lost, more confused about what I was supposed to do next. When I opened the door, there she was, Leona, sitting on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked like she hadn't moved since I left. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her eyes swollen from crying. As soon as she heard me step inside, she sat up, her face lighting up with a flicker of hope. Malric, she said, her voice soft and uncertain. You came back. I live here, don't I? I replied coldly, shutting the door behind me. I tossed my coat onto the chair, not bothering to look at her for more than a second. I couldn't. Not without feeling that twisting knot of betrayal in my gut all over again. She stood up slowly, wringing her hands. "I didn't know if you would," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm here," I said flatly. "For now." Leona's face crumpled at my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't in the mood to comfort her, not after what I'd just learned. "Where did you go?" she asked tentatively. I turned to face her, crossing my arms over my chest. "I went to see Adrian," I said bluntly. Her eyes widened, and she took a small step back, as if the weight of his name was enough to knock her over. You talked to him?" "Yeah," I said, my voice sharp. "I wanted to see the guy you've been sneaking around with, the guy you apparently thought was worth risking everything for." Leona's hands flew to her mouth, and her eyes filled with fresh tears. "Malric, Save it," I snapped, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear another word from you unless it's the truth. No excuses. No half-truths. Just tell me how long this has been going on." Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. "I already told you for months," she said quietly. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "For months," I repeated. "Do you even realize how long that is, Leona? 4 months of lying to my face. 4 months of sneaking around. 4 months of pretending everything was fine while you were." I stopped, the words catching in my throat. Leona flinched at my tone, her tears spilling over. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said softly. "Stop saying that," I shot back, my voice rising. "You didn't mean for it to happen? What does that even mean?" "You don't accidentally have an affair, Leona. You made a choice." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know I did, and I hate myself for it. I hate that I hurt you, that I broke your trust. But Malric, I swear, it wasn't about you. It wasn't because you weren't enough." "Then why?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "If it wasn't about me, then why? What the hell could Adrian give you that I couldn't?" She hesitated, her hands trembling as she wiped at her face. "I've been unhappy," she admitted finally. Her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear her. My stomach sank. "Unhappy," I repeated. Leona nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "For months now I've felt lost. Like I'm just going through the motions. I didn't know how to tell you, Malric. I didn't even know how to explain it to myself. So instead of talking to me, I said bitterly, 'You talked to him.'" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I didn't go looking for him, Malric. He happened to be there when I needed someone to talk to, and it escalated. I let it escalate. I take full responsibility for that." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I turned away from her, running a hand through my hair as I tried to process what she was saying. How could she have felt so unhappy without me noticing? How could I have been so blind? "You know what hurts the most?" I said after a long silence, my voice trembling. "It's not even the cheating. It's the fact that you didn't trust me enough to tell me how you were feeling. We've been married for 9 years, Leona. 9 years. I thought we were a team." Her breath hitched, and she covered her face with her hands. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said through her tears. "I thought if I told you, you'd think it was your fault. But it wasn't. It wasn't about you. It was me." I felt broken, and I didn't know how to fix it. I let out a bitter laugh. "So your solution was to break us instead?" Leona sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking as she crumpled onto the couch. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," she said, her voice muffled by her hands. "I'll go to therapy. I'll cut Adrian out of my life completely. I'll do anything, Malric. Just please don't give up on us." I stared at her, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that she was truly sorry and that we could find a way to move past this. But another part of me, the part that felt like a knife had been plunged into my chest, didn't know if I could ever trust her again. "I need time," I said finally, my voice strained. Leona looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "I'll be here. I'll wait as long as it takes." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving her sitting alone in the living room. As I climbed into bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How do you rebuild a marriage after something like this? Could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I forgive her? The answers didn't come. All I knew was that nothing about our lives would ever be the same again. The days that followed were unbearable. Leona tried to keep her distance, but the tension in the house was suffocating. Every glance, every strained attempt at conversation felt like a reminder of what had been broken. I slept on the couch, though I barely slept at all. My mind kept circling the same questions. Why did she do it? Could I ever forgive her? And even if I could, what would be left of us? On the fourth night, I couldn't avoid her any longer. I found her in the living room, sitting quietly with a book she clearly wasn't reading. She looked up when I entered, her eyes wary but hopeful. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded, setting the book aside. "Okay." I sat across from her, studying the face I'd known for nearly a decade. I didn't see the woman who'd made me laugh or held me when life felt too heavy. I saw someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd lied to me. "Why him?" I asked bluntly. She winced, clearly expecting the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "He was there. He listened when I felt lost, and I let it go too far." "You let it go too far?" I repeated bitterly. "You mean you chose to go too far? You chose him over me, over us." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "Do you have any idea how that feels, Leona? To know that while I was here, trusting you, you were with him." "I do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for what I've done. But please believe me, I love you. I've always loved you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Love? Is that what you call this? You don't hurt the people you love, Leona." She started crying harder, but I kept going. "Why didn't you just talk to me? Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy?" "I didn't know how," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't even understand it myself. It wasn't about you, Malric. It was me. I felt broken, and instead of fixing it, I made it worse." Her words hit harder than I expected. Deep down, I knew there were cracks in our marriage, moments when we stopped connecting, when life got in the way, but that didn't make what she'd done any less painful. "So, what now?" I asked after a long silence. "What do you expect me to do with all of this?" Leona looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I don't expect anything," she said softly, "but I want to fight for us. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, cutting Adrian out of my life, anything. I can't lose you, Malric." Her desperation was raw, and for the first time in days, I felt the smallest crack in my armor. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. "If we try to fix this," I said slowly, "there are going to be rules. You block Adrian. You never see him, talk to him, or so much as think about him again. If he tries to contact you, you tell me immediately." "Done," she said, nodding quickly. "He's already blocked. I promise, Malric. He's out of my life, and we're going to therapy," I added. "Both of us, together and separately. If we don't put in the work, this doesn't stand a chance." "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice trembling with sincerity. I leaned back, letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to believe her, but the pain of her betrayal was still too fresh. "This is your one chance," I said firmly. "If I find out you've lied to me again, or if I feel like I can't trust you, I'm done. No second chances." She nodded, tears spilling down her face again. "I understand, and I swear to you, Malric, I'll never hurt you like this again." For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, and I didn't know if we'd make it. But for now, I was willing to try.